Hi, my name's Jamie Humphries from Lick Library, and today we're doing a feature for Guitar Interactive magazine, and we're here at the Marshall headquarters in Bletchley in Milton Keynes, and sitting with me is the wonderfully talented Mr. Doug Aldrich from Whitesnake. Doug, lovely to meet you. Thank you for taking the time
Jamie,
to come and hang out.
A pleasure to meet you.
So just wanted to get together today and just talk guitar. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to right now with the new Whitesnake album and the tours and you know the current clinic tour that you're doing for Marshall. I'd really like to kick things off. Just get a little bit of background about how you started to play guitar and what inspired you to start playing when you was a kid.
Well, I don't know really. I guess it was just hearing certain riffs and it just stuck in my head. Probably, like a 1,000 or 100,000 other guys was hearing Smoke on the Water or something, and that was the first riff that I learned. And but before that, I just was kind of drawn to the guitar part of the music. And my older sister had a record player and a record collection, and she had a Jeff Beck record. And before I even heard a note, I was in love with the guy because he was on the cover and it looked really cool. And I heard it and I was just like, that's amazing. And she had Zeppelin and Peter Frampton and some other stuff, Stevie Wonder.
Yeah. But
it was probably, Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, that Hendrix too. And one summer I ended up getting a cheap Les Paul copy, and we have gone from there.
Cool. So were you primarily self-taught, or did you take lessons, or was it just literally moving the needle back on the record and learning the riffs that way?
In the very beginning, when you start guitar, you really have to start from the very basics. It's like not even, when you're just starting off, you're hearing a song on a record and you don't know what makes that sound. So I was learning the basic chords and shapes that you would learn out of a book, and that's what I had. I did take some lessons for a minute, but it wasn't as inspiring for me. And but eventually, little by little, you learn a couple turns here and there from people, and you start to piece it together. And then I really did learn from ear a lot.
So did you spend a certain amount of time learning songs and then all of a sudden start really getting into technique? Because obviously you've got a killer picking technique, and it's something that you're quite renowned for. So did you spend time metronoming and working on scales, or was it just learning tunes and picking tunes that had runs in and just gravitating towards it that way?
In the beginning I was more a rhythm guitar player. That's really what I love to do was play rhythm, and I still do. Playing rhythms and trying to develop, when I'm writing, trying to develop rhythms is a really fun thing. It's the soloing is kind of the icing on the cake for me. But technique-wise, there are certain things that I have a little bit of an unorthodox type of technique. I play kind of a little bit more of a classical style a lot of times, and with my fingers like spread like this. Other times I'll bring my thumb over the top, but for certain stretches, things like this, I'll grab it more classical style. And it's partly because of my joints didn't bend. I'm not as flexible as some people. But back to the point, I started off playing rhythm, and then little by little I started to develop certain things that were good for me, and the picking and staccato stuff kind of came from kind of a Randy Rhoads and Gary Moore area, and the more legato stuff also came from Randy Rhoads and Gary Moore. But I love, I pretty much appreciate every guitar player, and it starts with those guys I mentioned: Beck, Page, Hendrix, Clapton.
So when you're obviously spending years working and learning tunes, studying to the records, were you in bands? Did you have like a covers band or an originals band or something?
Yeah, I started in a covers band. The first band was called Purple Haze, and we were doing Deep Purple and Allman Brothers and Bachman Turner Overdrive. We tried to do some Zeppelin. But little by little, you join different cover bands until you get to the point where you start to write some of your own stuff. And for me, that happened when I was more in my late teens, and started to dabble in writing, and you know. But the learning the covers really gives you a, you know, you gravitate towards the musicians that you love, and that kind of encompasses what your style is going to become. And then when you start writing, there's little flavors of those things in there.
Yeah. Now, just sort of, you know, checking out your CV, it's pretty extensive and pretty impressive, and you know, in terms of a career, it's just seems to have just, you know, raced away, which is amazing. How did you get your first break? And this, you know, tell us about some of the artists that you've worked with prior to, you know, obviously working with Whitesnake, possibly one of the biggest rock bands of all time.
Yeah, it's a real honor to work with Whitesnake, and I've been in the band for quite a while now. I'm one of the long-term guys.
Yeah.
Actually, Reb Beach and I are. But well, I moved to Los Angeles when I was just getting out of high school. I told my parents I was going to go to college, and I did for 3 days, and then basically said, you know what, I've had enough of school.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't recommend that for anybody else. I always tell people now in hindsight, that wasn't the best move to make. You want to go get an education. Maybe it's just musical education, whatever. Yeah. But I was kind of, you know, as kids are, I kind of knew it all, and I went off on my own and joined a band in Los Angeles, and we started doing gigs, and little by little, my name got around, and it's kind of a little blip in my beginning of my career, but it was kind of poignant because I got asked to audition for Kiss, and when I was 18, to replace Ace Frehley, and I didn't get the gig, but I did. They brought me to the studio, and we jammed in a giant rehearsal room, and they actually called me back, and I was obviously too young for that job, mentally, more so than probably anything else, but I didn't get it, but it did click in my head, like, you know what, I got something going on, so I should really start to hunker down and
pursue it
and work on and get serious about it. I was never really like dabbling with anything other than music, really. I mean, that's all I was living at that time, and little by little get a reputation and get an offer from a band that was maybe further up the chain, and until I got in a band with some musicians that I felt were really, really great, and it was a band called Lion.
Yeah.
And we did a record for a subsidiary of a major label, and it just ended up not being the right contract. It wasn't conducive to us doing well.
Yeah.
But we had done a good record, and that helped my rep, and kind of bounced around a little bit here and there, but I'm kind of a late bloomer, because it was around 2001 that I actually started working with the Dio band.
Right.
And that's what really has gotten me out there.
Right.
Ronnie perpetrated my name a lot, and that's how I pretty much had gotten noticed by David.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about what it's like to work with such a legendary singer as David Coverdale, and obviously, you know, some of the guitar players. There's Steve Vai, John Sykes, Bernie Marsden, Mickey Moody. You know, that's a prestigious
Jimmy
guitar.
Page and a guy called Richie Black.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of names there.
Yeah.
You know, how did you feel about that?
Well, by the time I got with David, my mindset was feeling pretty invincible. I mean, I was feeling confident, because Ronnie made me, you know, deliver the goods. He basically turned the stage over to me every night, and you know, it was like kind of proving myself every day, and him pushing me and me taking the challenge and going with it. And so when I got to work with David, I felt pretty confident. I was still really excited about it.
Yeah.
But originally I was in the Dio band. We had done a record called Killing the Dragon, and we had shot a DVD, and then David was reforming Whitesnake in 2003, and he asked me to to do it. It was a 2-month tour, so it was kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Dio was going to be off, and Ronnie said, yeah, go for it. And that has turned into 9 years now. So it was a situation where we got on stage together with David, and it just really gelled and really worked out well. And he and I have a mutual admiration for stylistically what we do, and we have a lot of similar influences, and I've got a background of being a fan of his as well. Yeah. So there's a lot to draw from there.
So tell me, when you first came in to do this tour, you say it was just like a no-brainer. There was the tour. Was this tour originally just playing original material, older material, older Whitesnake material? Was there any plans at that point to then start working on new material?
Well, I asked him, I said, because he said, look, I want you to join the band, and I said, well, do you want to record? Do you want to, what's the plan? And because he knew I was working with Ronnie, and that I was being, I was creative with that project. And he said, look, I can't promise you, but he says, I definitely see you and I being in the studio at some point. And I thought that's very honest, and that's good enough for me. And I really, stylistically, I feel comfortable with the style of music that Whitesnake is. It was part of my background too.
You seem like the obvious choice. It's like whenever I watched one of the concert DVDs, and it's like this works. So
well, I'm one of the obvious choices. There's been a lot of us, but
when someone puts a band back together, that's my point. There's always that thing of when a big band comes back together, and it's like recruiting new members and stuff. That it seems, it's cool. It worked.
It definitely worked, and we hit it off, and it was a really that lineup that David put together with Tommy and Reb Beach and Marco Mendoza, and Timothy Drury on keys, and it worked really well. We were covering. It was meant to be kind of a greatest hits tour, I think, and that's what we did. But David and I would sit down and talk about music, and then we'd start kind of jamming on riffs and stuff, and then it would turn into like, hey, that riff was pretty cool. Let's work on that, and then. I'd go away and kind of bang through some ideas, and I'd send it to him, and he'd go, yeah, I like that one. Let's try changing this part or whatever. And we actually wrote some stuff at the end of 2003, and we wrote a little more in 2004. And it wasn't until really 2006 that we actually completed about 4 new songs for a live project. Yeah. And it was like the very beginnings of us working together, but there was definitely potential there. Yeah. But it wasn't until the following year in 2007 we started working on the record "Good to Be Bad," and we really got on a run of writing together and starting to feel each other out. And both of us being more confident to be honest with the other guy, like this is what we should do. And we kind of, it's very natural, but we made an agreement, kind of an unspoken agreement that if something wasn't getting us off, then we just move on. And then now with this current record we've just finished, Forevermore, it's even more natural and more effortly. So it's like our confidence has been growing every time.
Let's talk a little bit about the new record. You've got a tour coming up. Yeah. And obviously just being in the studio recording, brings us on a little bit about gear. Yeah. Which I believe this was the amplifier that you were using when you recorded the album.
I used this along with. I've got some favorite old Marshalls that are precious to me. So those are always on record. I've got a '79 JMP that is just ripping, and I use that all the time. But I ended up getting one of these a little bit later during the process, and then ended up using it on the record for lots of different, there's actually a lot of guitars on the record, and the JMD has so many of the classic Marshall tones in it, it worked out really well for a lot of bits.
Can you just tell us a little bit about how the amp works and the idea behind it?
Well, this in my opinion, and I'm probably not giving the best example, but this is like a hybrid amp of technologies. It's pretty high tech, but it's got an old school sound to it, and that's what I like. It's got a digital front end that basically they've kind of encompassed all the best classic Marshall amps into these different presets, and you know, you might pick a plexi type sound.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of work with that, and you can fine tune it a little bit.
And you got some effects there as well?
It's got some really, really amazing digital effects that actually, the whole great thing about digital effects is that you can make them sound analog.
Yeah.
It's really crazy.
Well, I noticed looking at the delay adjustment control here, we've got either analog or tape on there. So
yeah.
you're using modern technology to get those old school sounds. It's pretty cool.
They do those, you know, those algorithms or whatever they're called, and it sounds like the real thing. It blows my mind. But the feature is that they've got that technology, but on the back end of the amp is old school valves.
Cool.
And that's where you get that Marshall tone. I mean, there's a lot of I've got a pretty good collection of amps, and the most common denominator of all the amps that I like, that I've collected, is and the majority of them are Marshalls, but anything that I've got that's not a Marshall that I've collected has a Marshall-based back end. It's a Marshall-based output section. So that's what I always have used. And with the JMD, it has all the classic Marshall. You know, for me, it was like Marshall always had this sick mid-range sound that was great for. It was a lot of attitude, you know, in your sound. And the other thing that was interesting about this amp is that some of the time when we were recording, we would use a direct out. It's got a speaker emulated output, and it adds a really interesting flavor on top of a regular mic.
Right. So you'll be miking the cabs and then running the direct out into the board at the same time?
Yeah, or one or the other. I mean, sometimes I would mic a cabinet and use that, and other times we'd use the direct out exclusively.
Wow.
And the blend of those two worked out really well. And you can do it, you know, at the same time as well, mic and speaker emulated out.
Excellent. So what rig are you going to be taking on tour with you?
Well, I'm definitely going to be taking this for sure, because basically what it was is, you know, I've got, as I said, this favorite Marshall that I've had for years and years and years. And I've been a Marshall devotee before I even knew the guys, and they've graciously brought me into the family. But so I had this favorite Marshall that has been around the world a gazillion times, and I've loaned it to a lot of different guitar players that have used it on records, and it's always stood up every time. And when I went in to do pre-production for the new record with the drummer Brian Tishy, I brought that amp, and I also brought the JMD that I was actually just loaning it for a minute to check it out. And I wanted to see how close I could get this to that amp, and it blew me away. It really was. It had everything that my favorite old hand-wired vintage Marshall had. So that's when I decided, you know what, I want to try this on the tour, and so that's what I'm.
So are you going to be using a board, or are you going to be using mainly the effects out of the amplifier?
Well, I'm old school. I kind of like using a board. I like experimenting and changing. You know, I like the aspect of incorporating new technology with old technology, and basically just experimenting, you know. But and I'm going to bring various amps, but this is, at the moment, this is something that I've been able to find a setting in here that's really ripping, and it sounds killer. It sounds like me. So I'm kind of like I'm like almost a beta tester for Marshall sometimes. So
well, that's why you're here tonight. You're going to be performing at the Marshall Theatre. So no doubt a packed out crowd.
That'll be fun. It's a very casual experience, an evening kind of just chatting and playing, and it gives me an opportunity to really talk to people directly, you know, and get questions and interact.
Cool. Well, I'm going to let you get yourself sorted and warmed up and eat some food. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk to us guys and all the viewers and readers of Lick Library and Guitar Interactive. So it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you, Doug.
Jamie,
thank you ever so much.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much.